Welcome to Food for Thought. Today we're going to be doing an explainer on the origins and history of the division in Northern Ireland while making a Guinness cake. It was just St. Patrick's Day recently and I've been learning more about the troubles in Northern Ireland, but I still didn't know that much about the history and the origin. I think a lot of times it gets reduced to a religious conflict, or some people don't know that much about the troubles, but they've seen Derry Girls, so I wanted to learn more. So let's get started. I had Guinness cake for the first time when I came to London a few years ago, and it was just amazing. It was so chocolatey and fudgy, and the Guinness just really complements the flavor profile of chocolate. We're gonna be using Nigella Lawson's cake recipe, and yes, I do see the irony in using the recipe of an English chef, but here we go. Bring the pan. The Troubles was a 30-year conflict in Northern Ireland from about 1968 to 1998. The conflict was about whether or not Northern Ireland should be a part of the United Kingdom. There was a division between the loyalists, those that were loyal to the English crown and wanted to be a part of the UK, and the nationalists, or the Republicans, those who wanted a united, independent Ireland free of British rule. So what were the origins of the conflict in Northern Ireland? For that, we have to go all the way back to the 16th century. That far back? Yes! That far back. Quick taste test for the chef. That's Guinness. 250 grams of butter. All right, 252 grams of butter. Why not? 75 grams of cocoa powder. 400 grams of castor sugar. 250 milliliters of Guinness. Wow, I'm pouring it terribly. 150 milliliters of sour cream. Prior to being under English rule, Ireland was made up of various kingdoms and Gaelic chiefdoms and subject to Viking and Norman invasions. But in 1542, Henry VIII declared himself King of Ireland and conquered the various Irish kingdoms and established the Kingdom of Ireland united under English rule. Vanilla extract, of course. Beat the sour cream with 2 large eggs. As you may remember from history class and your obsession with the Tudor dynasty, Henry VIII set the stage for England to become a Protestant country when he separated from the Catholic Church. The VIII infamously wanted a male heir, but the Catholic Church wouldn't allow him to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. So he separated from the church and established the Church of England. He could go on to behead and divorce his wives to his heart's content. In 1603, King James VI of Scotland became King James I of England, uniting Ireland, Scotland, and England under one king. King James I was a Protestant king and had Catholic subjects. England and Scotland were Protestants, but the Irish were Catholic. King James I feared that the Catholic population would be more loyal to the Catholic Church, which it turns out it was because rebellions were frequent. Let's cook! So notably, the conquest of Ireland, including the banning of Catholicism, imposition of English law and language instead of Irish language, and the confiscation of land from native Gaelic population to be used for plantations and colonial settlements. Now, the plantation in Ulster, Northern Ireland, was the most Gaelic, the least Anglicised, and thus making it the most resistant to British rule. The butter's melting. I'm just going to measure my flour, so it's going to be 275 grams of plain flour and 2.5 teaspoons of baking soda. To control and subdue the north of Ireland and ensure loyalties to the English crown, King James I undertook strategic colonization, planting immigrant lowland Scots and English Northerners in Northern Ireland, enticing immigrants with land and ultimately relocating the Irish Catholics. Now, interestingly, the Scots, especially Western Scots, are actually a Gaelic-speaking people that immigrated from Ireland to Scotland in the 5th century BCE. The colonization of Northern Ireland took away native lands and gave them to Protestant settlers that were loyal to the crown. This meant the native Irish lost their land, with the new settlers becoming wealthy landholding elites, leading to further divisions and eventually the Ulster Uprising in 1641. Butter's melted, so now I'm gonna add the chocolate and the sugar. Uprising was an uprising by the Irish Alliance in Northern Ireland to fight against English rule and return confiscated land. The violent uprising, though, ended in the reassertion of English and Protestant dominance and would have a lasting impact on the relations between Catholics and Protestants for generations to come. Protestants in Northern Ireland would also go on to change the religious demographic in Northern Ireland toward a Protestant majority, particularly in 6 of the 9 counties of Ulster, securing this portion of Northern Ireland for English loyalty, which is important for later. Cream mixture now to the chocolate mix. This chocolate and Guinness smells amazing. Wow. In Northern Ireland also held greater rights, and Catholics were subject to severe discrimination, facing limited political, civic, and economic control. The Irish penal laws imposed strict restrictions on Irish Catholics, attempting to suppress and marginalize them and keep them out of power, limiting them from owning land, holding public office, voting, establishing schools, practicing their faith, speaking their own language, and even banning intermarriage between Catholics and Protestants. Rebellion, these restrictions against Catholics were eventually repealed, and Catholics got re-granted their full civil rights. The 1790s also saw a desire for Irish independence with the formation of the Society of United Irishmen, a movement supported by both Catholics and Protestants, with the aim of achieving an Ireland free of British control. However, British forces said no and suppressed this rebellion and incorporated Ireland into the UK with the 1801 Act of Union, abolished the Irish Parliament, solidified British control over Ireland. Cake mix is done and looks beautiful. Is going in. Now let's jump to 1845 when the Irish potato famine broke out across Ireland and devastated the Irish crop, a very important staple crop to the diets of Irish people. But during this time, Ireland was actually still producing enough grain to feed their population, but Britain continued to export huge quantities of food and grain from Ireland to England for profit, while Irish people died of starvation, which is why in Ireland the potato famine is also referred to as the Great Starvation. And to this day, 200 years later, the population of Ireland is still less than it was before the Irish potato famine, so it absolutely devastated the population. Now, interestingly, one of the groups that actually did come to Ireland's aid during the potato famine was indigenous Chocolatey Nation in the United States, who had recently endured their own devastation during the Trail of Tears. They donated the modern equivalent of thousands of dollars to help Ireland, and during COVID, Ireland returned the favor, fundraising $1.8 million to supply water, food, and health supplies to the Navajo Nation and the Hopi Reservation during the COVID-19 pandemic. But back to Ireland. Famine provoked anger between Ireland and England. Though they were under British rule, the Irish realized that they were not considered equal and they were allowed to starve. This spurred anti-English resentment, rebellions, and further calls for independence from the United Kingdom. Calls for Irish Home Rule, which is a campaign for Irish self-government, where they have their own parliament and autonomy of their own laws, but they're still within the UK, were proposed. First Home Rule was proposed in 1886, but was defeated. British Unionists in the North didn't want to be separated from the UK and were against the establishment of Home Rule. They signed the Ulster Covenant in 1912, opposing Home Rule by all means which may be found necessary, basically threatening an uprising if Home Rule passed. Third Home Rule bill actually did pass in 1914. However, this was suspended because World War I broke out. Stalin passing the Home Rule led Republicans to stage the Easter Uprising in 1916, a violent uprising that was quelled by the British Army. The British Army executed the leaders of the Easter Uprising by firing squad and arrested and imprisoned thousands of suspected rebels. But the brutality of the British response actually hardened republicanism and galvanized people against British rule. Public support then shifted from Home Rule to the Sinn Féin party, which demanded an independent Irish republic. In 1918, Sinn Féin won the general election and declared themselves a parliament of an independent Irish rule, which led to the Irish War of Independence between the British government and the IRA, a paramilitary organization of the Republic of Ireland. Now for the icing, 300 grams of cream cheese. So in 1920, the UK did grant Home Rule to Ireland, hoping to create a parliament in Northern Ireland and one in Southern Ireland, partitioning Ireland into two parts. But this didn't work either, since Northern Ireland was against Home Rule. It's also important to note that during the 19th century, north of Ireland became an industrial hub with close ties to England. Textile manufacturing and the shipbuilding industry rapidly industrializing the north. Belfast in Northern Ireland was also an important port city for the UK and a key industrial city during the UK's efforts in World War I. Now 150 grams of icing sugar and 2 teaspoons of corn flour sitting over the cream cheese. The Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921 finally ended the Irish War of Independence, establishing Ireland as a free state. Though they were still under the dominion of the UK and had to swear an oath to the British Crown. But the treaty was still controversial, leading to division between those that were pro-treaty and those that were anti-treaty. In 1923, the pro-treaty forces won, solidifying the Irish two-state solution and maintaining Northern Ireland under UK rule. Final step, 125 milliliters of double cream, plant-based. Add to the cream cheese mixture, whip to combine. Ireland was comprised of 6 counties and Ulsters. Yep, they're the same with counties. In areas with a Unionist and Protestant majority. In this way, Northern Ireland was designed to ensure Unionist loyalty and be a Protestant state for Protestant people, with the border of Northern Ireland often being drawn even in the middle of towns and villages. Though there still remained a substantial Catholic population in Northern Ireland, voting was manipulated through gerrymandering. If there's one thing I hate, the voting was manipulated through gerrymandering to ensure Unionist success, and Catholics faced voting with discriminations and disadvantages in terms of access to jobs and housing. Now, by the late 1960s, the Catholics had had enough, and civil rights protests calling for equal treatment of Catholics were met with violent crackdowns and escalated into full-scale conflicts. Paramilitary groups emerged on both sides, with the IRA seeking a united Ireland, while loyalist groups like the Ulster Volunteer Force fought to keep Northern Ireland within the UK. British military's presence further inflamed tensions, and over the next 3 decades, thousands of civilians were caught in the crossfires of bombings, assassinations, and street battles. The Good Friday Agreement of 1998 finally brought an end to most of the violence, but the legacy of the Troubles still lingers. Brexit, for example, reignited concerns over a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, threatening the delicate peace process. Even now, the Irish question remains a major issue in UK and EU relations as debates over Northern Ireland's future continue. But history is more than just conflict, and it's about the choices people make to build or break peace. And in the end, understanding that history is key to shaping a better future. And that is some food for thought.
And voila, a Guinness cake.